الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before I commence, I'd just like to request confirmation that that my voice is clear. Can somebody just confirm if you're able to hear me? Jazakumullah. Jazakallah. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending abundant salutations upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we welcome one and all to this very important presentation by our esteemed guest, Mufti Faraz Adam of Amana Advisors in the UK. Mufti Faraz is a global expert in Islamic finance and he has a special interest in the topic at hand, cryptocurrencies and crypto assets in general. Mufti Saab has written extensively various articles and has also published books on this matter. Perhaps one of the first books that have been published on relevant topics in this area of development. Mufti Saab has indeed been a pioneer in this. So we are really fortunate that he has availed himself, despite his various commitments, to present to us this morning. And we welcome and thank Mufti Faraz Adam for availing himself. Jazakumullahu khairan. For those who are joining us for the first time, we'd just like to give a very, very quick overview of the Islamic Business Masterclass. Islamic Business Masterclass is an initiative of Deen Pro, which is an organization that focuses on providing opportunities to Islamic business people, Muslim business people and professionals to adopt Islamic practices, values and principles in their business and professional practice. So the next slide just has an overview of the various aspects that we cover in our core curriculum. So it is quite extensive, alhamdulillah, and we are reaching the end of it after this particular special presentation this morning, which will be exclusively to the registered participants. But together with this core curriculum, what we do is we arrange special presentations and we open that to the broader public for further benefit. And in that way, we extend the benefit of this particular program and hope to, inshallah, obtain further registrations in the future to spread the message of Islam and extend it to our broader business and professional practices as we seek to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that being said, I'd like to hand over to our esteemed guest, Mufti Faraz Adam, who will now take us forward, inshallah, on this particular presentation. Mufti Faraz, I am appointing you now as the host. You can begin with sharing your slides. Jazakumullah.
Barakallahu feekum. Give me one moment. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear beloved scholars, dear friends and esteemed participants, it truly is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you all. I have a very special and deep connection with South Africa, and that is because I studied in South Africa. I enjoyed the company of South Africans and I lived amongst you all. And I was taken aback by the hospitality that I received while studying in South Africa. And more than that, my beloved Sheikh and teacher, Mufti Ibrahim Desai Rahimahullah, was in South Africa. And so I have a lot of love for South Africa, and I always avail myself and be available to serve the people of South Africa in any way I can, inshallah. It truly is a privilege and an honor to be with you all. Now, this discussion on digital assets, what I like to call digital assets, right, and not cryptocurrencies, and I'll explain why. Just to give you some background on why and what has led me to discuss this and why I've been spending some time on this is because I guess it was back in 2015 when I was doing my master's in Islamic finance and banking, where for my dissertation, Bitcoin was beginning to rise. And as a student of knowledge, I've always had this kind of passion to, when you study fiqh, you want to apply the fiqh. You want to, as a student of knowledge, you always want to see how can you apply what you learn? How do you put the fiqh that you have into application and not let it just be theory over time, right? So you have this kind of curiosity, what I call intellectual curiosity. It's just there. And so I just started writing a dissertation on Bitcoin from a Sharia perspective. And I guess that the curiosity that I had when it came to implementing fiqh, it just led me to look further and further and further into this area. But nevertheless, I think we're just still in the infancy. There's so much to explore and discuss. This is just one subject. This digital assets is just one part of what I like to call Web3, right? You have blockchain, you have smart contracts, you have the metaverse, you have so many other areas within this whole space, NFTs, which are the architecture of where technology, Web3, fintech is moving towards. And that's really where we need to keep applying our minds and keep looking, because there's a huge need for people to research and just to understand what's going on and to give some kind of fiqh criteria for people already engaged in this space, because there's thousands, in fact, millions of people engaged already in this space. And therefore it just becomes something which students have a passion to apply and to engage with contemporary practices with fiqh. It gives them a good kind of base to do so. But nevertheless, inshallah, let's just move on. So firstly, look, the different terms that are used in this space. We have three terms that are common. We have crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, and digital assets. Crypto assets and cryptocurrencies, they're very similar, of course. They both have crypto in them, but the key difference is one has assets and one has currencies, as you can see. However, I'm not really fond of using the word cryptocurrencies because that gives a wrong impression of really what we're dealing with. Many cryptos out there, or I like to call digital assets, they are not currencies. They don't function like currencies. And when we generalize these digital assets by saying cryptocurrencies, what we are indirectly trying to say is that all of these things are currencies, and therefore people typically go towards discussing what currencies are. Many researchers, sometimes fatwa as well, will just address the currency element of things. But really, we're talking about digital assets here. We're talking about something far greater. These are not currencies just per se. And to be honest, many of them are not currencies, and they don't even qualify as currencies, right? My personal view on so many of these currencies is that they're just junk. They are not even Sharia compliant because they serve no real purpose whatsoever. They're not even a medium of exchange. They're just somebody in the bedroom has created a digital file which is now being traded on markets and has a market cap of 100 million, right, dollars. And that person has become a millionaire overnight. And nobody's usually using these currencies for anything but it's trading on markets. So that doesn't make something a currency. Trading on the market is not a medium of exchange. It's purely just people speculating, out of FOMO, the fear of missing out. So the right term to use is digital assets, because we have so many types of assets now in space, in the kind of decentralized space. As I mentioned, we have smart contracts, we have NFTs, we have these crypto assets. So digital assets is potentially the right word to use when you're addressing this space, because there's assets which are more than just currencies, and not all are crypto assets per se, right? And so I would encourage us to focus on this terminology because it widens our scope and makes us understand that there's so much more happening in this ecosystem. This ecosystem is more than just people trying to develop currencies. Now let's just define digital assets. What are they, right? Digital assets can be defined as digital representations of value that use cryptographic encryption techniques. So the key thing is it's a digital representation of value. When we talk about value, and it's important to have these discussions because these are philosophical terms. Like, what do we mean by value? What is understood by value in the digital space? Whereas when we have tangible items, value is something completely different. We talk about experiential value. We talk about this idea of intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is it's a very subjective term that's used. What is intrinsic? What is extrinsic? Some people have tried to define it, but again, it's all philosophy. Somebody's intrinsic value can be different to another's, and therefore there's a lot of subjectivity. But the idea is there's actually gain in here. There's some kind of benefit. There is people are seeking this for something that lies within this asset or this digital representation. One thing I always mention to friends is that we can't try to understand the digital space by doing qiyas and drawing an analogy to the world that we live in. You can't equate the two to be the same because they're not. The digital space does not have the limitations that we have in the real world. And therefore, when you try to understand many things in a digital space by trying to look at texts, writings, theories, philosophies of things based on the real world, you may fall short in certain areas. Therefore, you have to understand the principles which scholars, writers, philosophers, academics, when they write, what's the underpinning and driving rationale and theory or legal underpinning which made scholars write what they're writing? That's key. Understanding the deeper meaning of fiqh is key to addressing many of these contemporary challenges. Simply just reading something superficially and applying the ruling is not serving fiqh in its true sense. So understanding value in that space. What makes something value in the digital space? What are you trying to achieve? Do you have the same boundaries, the same outcomes, the same needs? Right? Of course not. The digital space has its own needs, its own requirements. In fact, it has its own infrastructure and architecture. To develop an architecture, a digital architecture, digital infrastructure, you will need digital brick and mortar. You will need digital assets. You will need everything to digital. And therefore, we can't understand and equate everything by just looking at the physical world. We need to understand what is it for that digital world? What is it trying to achieve? What are its underpinnings? What are the things that move within that ecosystem? So that's the first thing. So a digital asset can represent an asset, a utility, a service, a right, or anything for that matter. When we talk about digital assets, an asset can be coded and programmed to represent almost anything, an asset, a utility, a service. This is where the link comes. At times, the asset is being linked to something in the physical world. At times, the digital asset is not representing anything in the physical world, but in the digital world. And why would it be valuable in the digital world? Because it's useful in the digital world one way or another. A person may need to unlock something, to access something in the digital space. A very simple example, they could be, this is like an event which is streaming online. So it's in the digital ecosystem, quote unquote, right? Now, to access this, you could have received a physical ticket, you could have received a link, or you could have received a digital asset or a digital ticket, right? That would work because you're trying to access a digital service. So to benefit in the digital world, you need to access and use something which is digital, right? And that's where we say that ecosystem will have its own kind of technology, its own assets, and its own services being utilized. Likewise, the digital assets can represent a right or anything for that matter. According to Ernst & Young, a token, that's another word that's used, right? So token is another typical word that's used in the industry to represent or mean the same thing more or less as an asset. But I would say digital assets are just broader because tokens don't typically include smart contracts, although they're coded on tokens, but it's blockchain. But when you use digital assets, it's a better word, a more global term. And it I would say it indicates more to the mature conversation happening in the space. Because if you use the word crypto is just the catch-all now for anything and everything which happens in that space. And a lot of it is just junk and scams, in all honesty. But if we want to truly develop something and we truly want to make a system which is beneficial for people, that's what we want to achieve, then digital assets are the right term, always the right term to use for that matter. And so what did Ernst & Young say? A token tends to be designed to support a more narrowly defined specific use case of distributed ledger technology, right? That's what a token is. So you can see it's use case of distributed ledger, DLT, distributed ledger technology, which is what blockchain is, right?
Yes.
So there are different types of digital assets. And just quickly, let's look through the different types of digital assets. We have what's famously called cryptocurrencies, currency coins, tokens, or transactional tokens, right? These are your Bitcoin, your Litecoin, your Dash. What's the purpose of this? The primary utility is to serve as a medium of exchange and transfer of value. That's what they're there for. These tokens were designed to.
I couldn't give him an answer, but he'll most probably be a.
Right. These tokens were designed to function as an exchange or function as a medium of exchange. That's the only purpose of these tokens or these digital assets. The idea was, let's create something in the digital space which serves as a medium of exchange, which circumvents many of the challenges we face with fiat currencies. Because if I send to South Africa from the UK, if I want to send money through fiat currency, I'll have a cost of 30, 40, 50 pounds almost to make a wire transfer. I could be using several remittance services, but there'll be a cost. It's business to business typically. There's a huge cost. But if I use a digital asset, that cost will be fractional to that, right? It'll be a fraction of that amount. And therefore, and not only that, for many countries, the fiat currency, inflation is rife. The people are losing their wealth and value overnight. So there was a need, and there was, I guess, a desire amongst people to develop something and create something which serves as a medium of exchange in this digital space. And therefore, we had this the start of Bitcoin and the Litecoin and Dash, these other tokens, which serve as transactional tokens. The FCA, which is the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, the regulator, they call these tokens exchange tokens, meaning they are primarily designed to function and purposes for exchange purposes, right? That's their only remit and that's their focus. They're just there as exchange, right? Number two is security tokens. What are security tokens? Security tokens are digital tokens based on blockchain technology that are similar in nature to traditional securities. So this is where you have a token which is securitizing assets. So it could be like how we have shares of a company. You can issue tokens, and these tokens will represent the same way in securities. It could be any financial instrument or financial asset. Of course, some will be not Sharia compliant, some will be Sharia compliant. But it'll give you a stake or what we call an ownership interest in an underlying equity or underlying company. That's a security token. There's not many of them, to be honest, but they do exist. Number three is utility tokens. Utility tokens are those which provide the users with access to a product or service and derive the value from that right. So utility tokens are like tickets. They grant you access to utility and services. That service can be anything. It can be that you are accessing as I mentioned, a lecture, a webinar. It can be an experience. It could be a gallery online. It can be some digital kind of event. It could be anything, right? A service. It could even be something like Google Maps for that matter, right? Someone who's created a navigation tool, but you need to access that. You need to pay, and to pay for that, you use these tokens. Like it's just creating things in digital space and using tokens for that. Then you have asset-backed tokens, which are very interesting. Asset-backed tokens are those which are tokens which are representing ownership in physical assets, right? So for example, if somebody has 100 barrels of oil, they tokenize that, meaning the token itself represents ownership of the barrel. Whoever has the token has the ownership of a particular barrel, right, of oil. And so they're marked, they have the serial numbers and everything. So that's asset-backed tokens. Now these, again, can work and function. This is how we have certificates, which are used to denote ownership of particular assets. And these certificates are then used as proof of ownership and also possession as per the IOP standards and others. That this gives you constructive possession and ability to enact transactions in that underlying asset. Asset-backed tokens could function in the same way. So you can now tokenize gold. You can tokenize gold and have an exchange of gold, but on a digital platform, because it's been tokenized, and the token that you have, the serial number, the bar of gold is encoded within this token, right? It's a proof of ownership of a particular bar of gold, and then you can trade that. It's happened. There are tokens which actually do that. Many tokens who say they do that, they don't typically do that. You have to be very careful what you're buying and what you're dealing with. Governance tokens is number 5. Governance tokens grant their holders governing rights on a protocol. So the whole idea, as the name says, is governance. So if you have a token, a governance token, it will allow you to then vote. It will give you governing rights. So if you are working in a membership kind of body on a project to say you're running a company, you could develop tokens which deploy voting rights to the members. And by exercising the governance tokens, you will be exercising your rights and your view, right? That's how you vote. So governance tokens are a very valid use case that are, again, deployed in the digital space. And then you have platform tokens. Platform tokens, some industry experts have coined a term. What they mean is when these tokens are used as fuel or gas on a network. What do we mean by that? To execute transactions, to execute a contract, some platforms require you to use the native token of that platform, and those are called platform tokens. So it will not be executed unless you use a small amount, a fraction of that token on the network to then execute and finalize that transaction. So this gives you like an overview of there's a lot happening in that space. It's not simply currencies, right? Currencies are a very small fraction, but the entire digital space, it has so much potential, so much opportunity, and there's actually an argument that can be made that you could literally launch Islamic Finance 2.0 in the digital sphere, just based on the architecture that we have available, right? If we really put our minds to it, you could start creating structures and products. In fact, I've already been involved in that space, creating products and services in Islamic finance in a Sharia compliant way in the kind of digital ecosystem. There's a lot that can be achieved, especially for those countries which are challenged by financial inclusion. We have almost 1-2 billion, right? If you look at the numbers, it's phenomenal. People who are underbanked, underserved, lacking financial access to financial services, lacking financial inclusion. They have the technology, but there's no financial inclusion there. Or the countries that they live in are not developed enough to be able to give them the opportunities that they need. And that's for various reasons, not just internal, rather external too. And so this can be a way of empowering people. That's the whole point. What's the point of Islamic finance? What's the point of everything that we do? The point of everything, as I was telling my students yesterday, I was just telling them, look, what is Islamic finance? Islamic finance is financing your Islam. That's what Islamic finance is all about. It's not about just making money and making people rich or giving people an access and avenue to spend money or to invest money. That's not the point. Allah didn't give us the world just to become rich or wealthy. The whole point of everything that we have is that we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we build our akhirah. How do we build our akhirah in a halal way is what Islamic finance is all about, really. It's there to carve, and they're to allow you to deploy your funds and your finance, which then stabilizes you first and foremost, and then you can channel your funds in a halal way to halal projects and let money flow and circulate in the halal ecosystem. The more money flows in a halal ecosystem, the more barakah there is and the more people benefit. When money leaks out to non-compliant firms and a non-compliant kind of economy, that money is going to be used in riba and all sorts of things. That's why we want to create a network or an ecosystem where as the pound, dollar, rand circulates, it's only circulating and going amongst people who are engaging in halal businesses. You're empowering one another. You're strengthening one another. So the goal of Islamic finance is more than just money and financing and all these things. It's there to really develop people's dunya for the sake of akhirah. That's the key, right? Never forget that. That's what drives everything. Otherwise, what makes us any different? We're just doing structures in a halal way. Our focus and our hearts and minds are curved to dunya. It makes no sense whatsoever. But nevertheless, the use cases of digital assets, we have multiple use cases. Digital assets can be used for tokenization purposes, as I mentioned. You can tokenize a house, you can tokenize property. So you could get investors coming in, investing in property through tokens, and that gives them the certificate of ownership, like a shareholder certificate per se, but all on a digital platform. So you can tokenize almost any asset. You can tokenize gold, you can tokenize property, real estate, you can tokenize equity in a company, you can tokenize so many things. So tokenization is a huge area which is being developed more and more as we speak. Cross-border remittances. In fact, this can be remittances just locally as well as cross-border and internationally. But that's another huge case of using digital assets where you can remit funds to other parts of the world through digital assets. And typically what happens is, in the current world that we live in current times, digital assets are used as bridging assets. So if I want to send somebody in South Africa money, what I do is I could buy with sterling, I could buy X amount of tokens on a platform which is used as bridging assets, right? I buy that token, I send that token to you, and then you can convert that into your local fiat currency. So this bridging platform allows you to convert into fiat currencies on either side. So I can buy that bridge asset, I can send it to you, and then you can convert the asset into your local currency, and that will save you enormous amounts of fees. And also it's instantaneous. Right? It doesn't take time. It's instantaneous, and also in terms of control, KYC, governance, you don't have to go through so many hoops, right, and so many kind of like checks just to send money across a simple transaction. It can all be done very quickly on the DLT, distributed ledger technology. Then financing, as I mentioned earlier, you can get financing also as we finance in Islamic finance, right? In Islamic finance, in the traditional sense, where we're supporting businesses, we're supporting SMEs, we're doing a letter of credits, import, export financing. This can all be done through digital assets. It's the same concept, but you're moving the base to a digital space. Yes, the problem with that is how does the governance look, security look, data security, cybersecurity, all of that is definitely a concern, and it's something which needs to be developed further and further to build confidence in people to use. And there's a huge, I would say, opportunity for people to work there and start developing. Right now, I personally believe that whoever ventures into that space right now, they are building and developing the architecture of the next 20, 30 years. And we have to be forward-looking. We have to be forward-looking. The world is moving to that space. Governments are already talking about CBDCs, these central bank digital currencies, right? They're already looking at how do we utilize DLT and distributed ledger technology, blockchain, to issue digital currencies. And that will require people who are experts in the space. You will need people who are experts, people who understand the space thoroughly and deeply. We will have so many products and services in Islamic finance in the next 20 years on this digital platform. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? It's going to happen sooner or later. That's where the world is moving to. That's where the shift is happening. Everything's become digitized, more and more as we speak. With the growth of artificial intelligence, the world's going to change rapidly in the next 20 years. Rapid change. And so we have to embrace these things with a view of how do we use this in a way which benefits the ummah, benefits people, really is a source of good, not just benefits the ummah, benefits the world for that matter. How can we unlock these things to benefit humanity in the right way? Because every person on the face of this earth needs servicing. They need help. Honestly, every person. You could be Muslim, non-Muslim, you can be living in any part of the world. People need help. If technology can help people in a positive way, then alhamdulillah, if you're amongst those people who lay the foundations and lay the bricks of that architecture, because you'll be helping so many people, and inshallah the ajr and reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be immense if it's done with the right intention. Number 4, investment, right? You could use digital assets for investment purposes. And number 5, data and information, right? You can store information and data on distributed ledger technology. There's many cryptos out there and tokens which are used to store files. You could store, so just how you have cloud services, you could have these cloud services on these platforms. This is a case study of Bitcoin. Really, it's just a lot has been written here, but just to give you an insight of what Bitcoin is and was. Bitcoin is simply a digital medium of exchange. That's all it is. Launched in 2009. The idea was how to create this peer-to-peer payment system, right? Everybody's heard of Bitcoin, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But just to give you an idea, I think this is key. Bitcoin is not an actual token or coin. People think Bitcoin is a coin. It's not. Bitcoin is purely a record on a ledger. That's all it is, right? Neither are you sending a value or coin or asset to a central server. When you send Bitcoin, you're not sending something physical, or even you're not sending a digital file to a central server, which is then being transferred to somebody else, right? Rather, what happens is, you're only instructing the ledger to change and redirect itself to somebody else. So you have a ledger, and that ledger has people who have keys to that particular data entry. You're just changing whose keys are attached to what data entry. That's all that's happening, right? So it's similar to how the current system of fiat currencies work for that matter. And this is how a typical kind of transaction looks, right? When you're making a transaction, and this is how it looks as you can see on your screen. And this is what a Bitcoin address looks like. You're just sending, or you're not even sending, but we use the word sending, but you're just allocating the amounts in an entry to somebody else. So just reallocation of funds. That's how the Bitcoin network actually works. Okay. Now let's just, for the last 10, 15 minutes, I just want to focus on the Sharia considerations, I think, which is key. Like from a Sharia perspective, what are some of the discussions that need to be had and considered when looking at digital assets? So I said, firstly, you have to understand from a Sharia perspective, whenever we analyze something, there are different types of assets existing in the world, right? So we're looking at the physical world now, because the basis of everything will be the physical world.
I first need to see the uncle downstairs.
It'll be the physical world, which will be the basis of understanding the digital world, right? And then, but from there, we look at, no, we're not just looking at the tangible things, we're rather looking at what made that an asset. What is it about that thing that we're looking at in the physical world, which made it an asset? What are the key parameters? And that will help us in our discussions and our kind of like deep dive in the digital space. So there's many types of exchangeables that we have. We have assets, which is known as urud and sil'ah in the Arabic language. We have currency known as nuqud. Gold and silver are typically referred to as nuqud in the books of fiqh. Thaman is just payment, right? Thaman doesn't refer to gold and silver. Rather, thaman is payment in the Arabic language. Anything can be thaman, right? It's a medium of exchange. It might not be a currency, but for the purpose of a particular transaction, it's the payment. So I can have anything as thaman in a transaction. It doesn't have to be the currency of that country. Then we have something called usufruct, right? The services, the benefits that are used to by people. That's straightforward. So I have this. I'm leasing a car. I have the usufruct of that car. I don't own the property and corpus of the car. Rather, I own the usufruct and the benefit of that car. That's what I've paid for. Then you have number 4, rights. Hukuk. Hukuk are rights which are tradable. There's different types of rights that exist, but in essence, they may have rights today, which are some rights are recognized, some rights are not recognized by scholars, but there are rights which are tradable. An example that I typically give, and it is a simple example, that when you buy a ticket to go on a train, so for example, in London, if I buy a ticket to go on the underground, then that ticket is not specific to me. That ticket is just a ticket. It's a right to the ticket holder to enter the train, the underground train, and you can use it. And you can walk through the barriers with this ticket. But it's not specific to me. The contract is not with me personally, rather it's with the ticket holder. That's more like a right to use the service of the underground as opposed to a contract of leasing a car. That's a service contract, like an ijara or a lease, and not a purchase of a right. That's a purchase of manfa, purchase of usufruct, because that's specific to me as the counterparty. Whereas when you buy a ticket for public transport, any person with the ticket can board on that train or transport and vehicle, and therefore it's more of a sale of right. Then you have debt and dain. Debt is simply, as we all know, a liability, a claim that people have. It's something which is invisible. It's recorded on balance sheets as liabilities and receivables, and it's what's owed and what people owe, right? And but it has no tangibility whatsoever. Then you have nothingness. Nothingness is also traded in today's world, right? Unfortunately. We have things which have no kind of economic value and just nothing. For all intents and purposes, they're nothing, right? But they are traded and it's an exchangeable. And of course, from a Sharia perspective, it would never be Sharia compliant. So when you have something which is purportedly an asset, but it's not really an asset from a Sharia perspective, it'll be nothingness. You could have something which is claiming to be a currency, but it's not a currency, it's not an asset, it could be nothingness, right? So if something doesn't fulfill any of these areas, it could fall under nothingness. And so this is important to understand crypto or digital assets, because when you're analyzing different digital assets, you look at a digital asset. Which features does it have, right? And harbor. And therefore, where does it sit in this circle? Is it a right? Is it a usufruct? Is it a currency? Is it an asset? Is it debt? Or is it nothingness? And of course, under each of these headings, you have multiple Islamic and Sharia criteria the scholars and experts in fiqh will be using and deploying to decipher what's happening in the digital space. But as a broad stroke, I would say this to always start the conversation with this is key, because look, from a Sharia perspective, the asal and the kind of default is everything is permissible. Adopting new software and technology is permissible and lawful. Sharia doesn't restrict as or limit us when it comes to mu'amalat. When it comes to business transactions, investments, finance, and anything to do with mu'amalat and people's dealings, the reason why Sharia has permitted this, in fact, the reason why we have mu'amalat and exchange, it's there to fulfill people's needs in the world. Mu'amalat was primarily and is primarily for the dunya and secondarily for the akhirah. Whereas ibadat primarily is for the akhirah and secondarily the benefits are in the dunya. So mu'amalat and these transactions, commerce that we have, business dealings, primarily they're designed to fulfill our worldly needs so that we can focus on what concerns us more. But when they are designed primarily to fulfill our worldly needs are, as you know, worldly needs could be finite, but desires and wants are infinite, right? As the famous economic debate goes, and the economic problem of limited resources and unlimited wants, right? So scarcity. But we have Sharia has empowered us that when it comes to fulfilling worldly needs, the basis default is permissibility. The world will change, times will change, space, era, people, geography will be different. So Alhamdulillah, the Sharia has given us this principle that you can be living in the 5th century or the 25th century for that matter. But the Sharia will always give you the opportunity to develop an ecosystem, an economic system, which serves your needs and people's needs, and to function and use resources efficiently, to have an efficient economic system. Because that will, like, as is mentioned in Dawr al-Mukhtar, a famous book written by Imam Haskafi rahimahullah, he mentioned that what's the purpose of buyu and mu'amalat? He says, baqa'ul alam, the entire world, for the world to remain and to function, you need an economic system powering it. It needs to be powered by an efficient economic system. Otherwise, there'll be chaos and anarchy, and Sharia likes order. Sharia seeks order. Sharia wants order, not chaos. So order is done through the economic system in the economy. And so Sharia has given us this legal maxim, which is all about when it comes to anything in mu'amalat, the default is it permissible. Somebody who's making the claim that it's impermissible has to prove that it's impermissible. The kind of onus lies on them to prove that something is impermissible. If somebody says this is permissible, and there's nothing obviously impermissible, then it's permissible from a mu'amalat perspective. But of course, this statement should be made by those who are experts and know what they're talking about, right? Because if a person is ignorant and has no idea, they're not positioned in the first place to make that judgment or to understand. So that's key. But generally, permissibility is a state of all things by default. Now, to finish off with, what are some of the key discussions and discussion points when it comes to digital assets? Number one, is it property or wealth? This is a huge debate where people argue that are digital assets even property? Like, do they even exist? So they argue on that basis because it's digital. The counter argument that's typically posed is that we are on a daily basis engaging in files and in data. And in all honesty, everything that we talk about is data. Data is a sum of all parts, right? Data is a common denominator in the digital space. Everything is data. But data is valuable. Data is valuable, right? I mean, look at today, the world, how every website is trying to take your data. Why is it such a drive? Like in UK and Europe, we have something called GDPR, right? Which is regulation on data and sharing data. Why is the world so, you could say, paranoid or so like concerned with data? And because data is traded, data is an entire market, right? So data, these digital assets, they are data for all intents and purposes. Not only that, they do, as we mentioned, they have linkage to the real world. They can be tokenized, and they don't even need linkage to the real world. A digital asset can be used or can be developed to access something in the digital world, as I mentioned earlier. So to argue whether it's property or wealth, we don't need to look at the item itself. Let's not look at, oh, is it a tangible thing? Right? People get fixated on the idea of something being tangible. That it's not tangible, so how can it be property or wealth? Well, look at the benefit and use of it. Because the scholars, when they talked about, it was only Imam Haskafi rahimahullah and amongst the scholars who inserted the word ayn when defining what mal and property is in Sharia. Besides that, the fuqaha don't use the word ayn. Mufti Taqi Usmani hafidhahullah, he mentions this in Fiqh al-Buyu. He has a long discussion, and classical scholars have discussed it. When it comes to what is property, it's all about manfa'ah, benefit. Anything which is beneficial can become mal, because there's a value, economic value, and the people are inclined towards it. In fact, scholars have negated tangibility when it has no value. The scholars mention if there's a grain, a seed, just a seed, right? One seed. No person will want to buy that seed. It has no economic value, and therefore that cannot be traded. It's not mal, because nobody will want to pay money for one seed. Why do they say that? So nobody can then sell this one seed, exploit somebody, sell this one seed, and claim a right to payment. it will not be accepted as payment or as even a sale item. That's one seed. So being property and wealth, that's the one place where it's argued. Number two is lawful use case. Of course, like the world that we live in, there are things which are not lawful. Same principles will apply when it comes to looking at the digital space. There'll be services, there'll be benefits, there'll be investments, there'll be financial services which are not Sharia compliant. Some digital assets are used to lend. Some digital assets are used to for interest-based financing. Now, that doesn't mean that's okay. Of course, it's not okay. So that'll be a problem. That's why you need experts in that space to understand and to guide people who are engaging in that space. Number three, money control. This is a huge and interesting discussion, which is about, and it refers to more on things like Bitcoin and other types of like payment tokens, where the objection is that only the government, like who decides what is money? And can you have a system which, you know, purportedly saying it's money, yes or no, right? Can that be done? So you have the likes of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, who are very clear and explicit in their writings that only the authority has the right to mint new coins, and no private sector entity can mint coins, because minting and or you could say minting coins has a huge impact on the monetary system. The monetary policy is key to Sharia. That's why the fuqaha clearly mentioned debasement, coin clipping to be not permissible. In fact, the scholars, Imam Malik rahimahullah, the scholars of Medina, they explicitly state that even if there's a darura, if there's a necessity, even then you cannot debase and coin clip and print money artificially. They emphatically say that. They said even if it's darura, why do they mention that? Because darura is a principle which even makes something unlawful for you temporarily. It makes you that you are concession to use something. So if you're in a desert, you're on the verge of death, and there's some alcohol there. Out of darura, you're about to pass away. You could have a sip of that just to quench your thirst, as mentioned in the Quran and as we know in the books of fiqh. But the scholars mention even if you have necessity and darura for debasing, coin clipping, and printing more coins and or minting more coins, you will not be permitted to do so. Why? Because when you start messing with the monetary system, you're not impacting one person. You're not impacting 10 people. You're impacting every single person who is using this coin. So you are doing aklu amwalin nas bil batil at a macro scale. By printing money, you are devaluing money. The more money that's supplied in the economy, that's how inflation starts, right? The monetarist theory is inflation is partly due to excess liquidity or excess cash circulating in an economy, and there's not enough productive output on the other side to create equilibrium between the monetary supply and demand of goods, and therefore prices of goods have to rise. And that's what happens. So when you're playing, and what happens also on the other side of the coin is people's value, the purchasing power of your money depreciates and decreases. So with minting and printing and having this money machine, what happens is you are impacting the wealth of millions of people, and that's why no darura can ever justify that. Right? So money control is a huge discussion. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, they discussed this. Hanafi scholars don't mention this. The Hanafi scholars are very clear that look, it's down to the people, what people, how they govern themselves and what they do. Yeah, for maslahah purposes, there may be fuqaha later on, or fatawa, which will state that no, only the government has this particular right. The only question I pose here is it the government that is the objective, or is it governance that's the objective? Right? Is it the government, or is it the governance that the government is providing? If it's the body of government, then yeah, it makes sense that it's only the government who can do this. But were the scholars talking about government or governance? What was the focus? If you say the latter, that it was governance, then if there was a system that was created that provides all the checks and balances that a government could provide, but there's a governance system that's created and it's operating with algorithms and maths, right? And on a distributed ledger technology, all the same checks and balances, could you then argue that you could get a system potentially of money functioning in a particular way in the digital space? That's where the debate is, right? Number 4, speculation. Some scholars raise the argument that when it comes to digital assets, people are speculating with their wealth. Now, when it comes to speculation, you have to understand that there's 2 types of risks, right? This is especially in the insurance law. If you look at insurance law, then there's risks known as pure risk and speculative risk. Pure risk is that thing where you stand to lose or your state stays the same, meaning there's no gain for you if that risk occurs. Speculative risk is that risk where you can gain, lose, or remain the same. Businesses' investments are speculative risks because by default, you can either gain, you can lose, or nothing. The outcome can be nothing. That's why in insurance will not insure any speculative risk. They will only insure pure risk, right? So speculation is in anything which is business, anything which is investment. It's speculation by default. You're taking a view. Speculation is taking a view. That's all it is. So if you take a view, if you invest in a startup, you're taking a view, and startups are so risky. If you look at some of the data on startups, and like 90% of startups fail in about the first 3-4 years or 2 years. There's a high chance and probability of you losing your money, but yet nobody will say it's not Sharia compliant to invest in a startup or business, which as long as the assets, the services, and the structure of it is Sharia compliant, nobody will object. So speculation is not determined by the activity, rather by the what you're investing in. That's what determines speculation. Yes, when the speculation becomes a problem, or an investment becomes a problem, when you are negating your obligations, you're not fulfilling the rights of your dependents, or you have liabilities and you're not fulfilling those liabilities, and rather you're speculating and you're investing elsewhere. That's when speculation is a problem, when now it becomes a conflict. But just taking a view in the market when you buy an asset which actually has value, that's not a problem from a Sharia perspective, as long as the contract is Sharia compliant. And then this is just it's an old kind of graph or chart that I made, or diagram that I made, which just gives you the different views of scholars. Scholars are in 4 different groups, you could say. Some scholars are the view it's not Sharia compliant, right? Some others, they don't tawaqquf, they've not, they just pause their kind of like judgment. They've not said anything because it's fast developing technology. They've done tawaqquf, they just said, look, there's no comment right now from us. Some scholars are the view that digital assets, cryptos are digital assets and can be Sharia compliant if they pass screening criteria. And some are of the view that no, cryptos can be actually treated as a medium of exchange as well, right? These are different views that exist in the market today. And there's respectable scholars, I would say, on all fronts. I always tell people just follow and go with the view of the scholars that you typically follow, and adopt their views and adopt caution. Especially in the current times when we've seen what's happening with FTX, with BlockFi and other exchanges, there are a lot of scams, honestly, in the crypto space and digital space. But yet there's also a lot of opportunity in terms of like developing something which is really meaningful and beneficial. So whilst we warn against the scams, we'll always tell people that, well, my personal kind of approach is always telling people looking at the opportunity and looking at things which are potentially Sharia compliant and how we can develop something which really serves people globally. And that's why I always have this kind of approach of screening, where alhamdulillah I developed this kind of screening criteria in the crypto space, where you look at the legitimacy first, right? The Sharia board should look at the legitimacy of any kind of crypto first before giving any view, or even as an investor trying to invest, looking at the business activity, what is it doing? Looking at the financials, is it heavily leveraged or not? Is its revenue coming from impure sources? Doing the token screening, what is a token all about? Staking, if there's staking involved, how is it structured, right? And that is really the end of my presentation. So Jazakallah khairan. Alhamdulillah, I just finished on time. And maybe for 5-10 minutes, if there's any questions, then I don't mind taking those questions and inshallah, trying to respond as best as I can. Brother Naeem, go ahead.
Brother, I just want to find out, is Bitcoin Sharia compliant? You're not saying yes, you're not saying no.
SubhanAllah, and I can't, I mean, as I mentioned, different scholars have different views on this, right? It'd be unfair for me to say, to not give that disclaimer, to respect scholarship. I must have that disclaimer. There's respectable ulama who said it's not Sharia compliant. And there are some scholars who have the view that it is, well, it aligns with Sharia principles. And I would just say on this, just go with the view of scholars that you particularly ask questions to. So whoever you typically ask questions to, and whoever's knowledge that you seek knowledge from, take their view and adopt that opinion.
I understand what you're saying, brother, but at the same time, not all muftis have studied cryptocurrencies as you have, or digital assets, if you want to say that.
I mean, yes and no. And there are scholars, mashallah, in the world who have, to be honest. Look, my personal view is that Bitcoin is acceptable. That's my personal view.
Thank
you. As I mentioned, there are scholars out there in the world who say that it's not, and I truly respect that opinion. I think it has merit as well, and I understand the arguments. Maulana Ashraf Sahab?
Thank you very much for a very, very comprehensive type of presentation. I really appreciate it. What would you say is you've gone through a screening process and shown us the steps briefly, but what would you say is the greatest challenge today for an alim who has to pronounce on a particular type of transaction involving a cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to digital assets, I think it's, the truth is, in muamalat and the kind of Islamic finance space, a scholar, it's my personal view, I feel they need to know economics, they need to know banking, they need to know law, tax regulation, accounting, technology. Fatwa in this space must be underpinned by all these disciplines, because digital assets and even Bitcoin is not just a financial thing, it's an economic thing. It's a thing of regulation, it's a thing of tax, it's a thing of politics and philosophy. It speaks to all these areas. And so before we can pronounce a judgment, a scholar must at least have working knowledge of all these areas. Otherwise, the fatwa will be very theoretical from a fiqh perspective, without understanding the reality of what you're speaking to. So, and that's the challenge. I think the challenge is that we need to upskill ourselves and be multidisciplined. And that's why I believe Sharia scholars in the Islamic finance space have to be and must be. And that goes for anything. If a mufti is giving fatwa in the medical field, they need to understand the medical field properly. If a mufti is giving fatwa in the food space, it's not enough to look at Wikipedia and give a fatwa. You have to understand the underpinning, at least have working knowledge of how the entire industry works. And I feel that's the biggest challenge, that the information asymmetry that exists between, or that gap that exists. There's so much to study, so much to learn, and the world is moving at such a fast pace, right? So that's the biggest challenge, I feel. It's just about me being weak and not being capable, and we're not really pushing and striving further and striving harder to understand things holistically. That's the challenge. I hope that answers the question. I just try to answer as best as I can, really.
Yes, no, thank you. I do realize that one has to bring a number of competencies to bear on the problem in front of you. Yes.
Yeah. Any further questions, anyone?
Jazakumullah khairan, Mufti Saab. There is a question in the chat which reads, a lot of the digital assets are now being used in the lending and borrowing space. I assume this is straight out prohibited.
Yeah, absolutely. When it's to do with the lending, in a conventional sense, interest-based lending and borrowing, it'll not be Sharia compliant. But to see there's opportunity there to develop Sharia compliant alternatives, because what would be amazing is if somebody developed microfinancing in a Sharia compliant way to support people who are disadvantaged in many areas, because many countries, I was working recently, I was on an assignment and working to support one country in Africa develop to develop a sovereign zakat fund for that country. And they all have access to technology. Most people now have smartphones, but what they don't have is financial inclusion, financial services. So what we realized was that you could use digital architecture to really empower people, right? And just allow people to get their goods and services, to empower people to just fulfill their basic needs, because we have the digital access. So there's a lot that can be done in this space to empower people. Whereas the fiat world and the conventional world has many regulatory kind of barriers, burdens. But this is a means to empower people. You can send payments or digital assets to like poor people in so many parts of the world. So it's revolutionizing that way. You have more access, you have more kind of opportunity. So there's a lot can be done through this to support people globally. Anybody else?
There is another question that's on the chat. What are the signals for us to keep an eye out for which may possibly jeopardize Sharia compliance with regards to the coins in the crypto space?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, don't just invest in, be very careful. As I mentioned, there's a lot of scams taking place, a lot of scams. There's like over 20,000 tokens, right? A lot of them just call themselves currencies. If something says it's a currency, I would be super wary. I would just be very cautious immediately. Because how can somebody just create a currency overnight in the bedroom, launch it online, and say it's a currency when it's not being used? What's a currency? It's a medium of exchange. It has to be a medium between what? Two assets. That's why the entire reason why people moved away from the barter system to using money was that it made things easy and it was an easy medium of exchange. It was this liquid asset people were ready to accept in lieu of any asset. And so these current cryptos, which are functioning as currencies, don't really function as any medium of exchange. They are just being traded, and just people are just literally gambling, you could say, right? To make more money. That's all they're doing. So if something is this currency, I'd be very wary. Try to look at the underlying, like the fundamental, like in shares, we do an analysis. We have the fundamental analysis and technical analysis. The fundamental analysis looks at the value of the company it actually holds within. Like, what's its predictive value? What is it doing? What is it trying to achieve? The technical analysis now looks at the trends, right? Or what's the kind of like market data and the trends of a particular investment. So you do a fundamental analysis here as well, like how you do in any investment. Understand the project very, very clearly. But again, I'd be very careful. Like, that's my personal, I'm very risk averse, right? So I'd just be very careful when it comes to investing in this space. Only if you understand the space properly, then get exposure to that.
There's one last question that we will take before we close, inshallah. I think it's more of an observation rather than I see that there's two more that came up, but let's just look at these last two, inshallah, before closing. With governments talking about CBDC, what is Mufti's take on it being regulated and being used as a future currency?
Yeah, I mean, see, the fuqaha talk about urf, right? Our fuqaha, the Hanafi fuqaha, talk about ta'amul and istilah. These are the two words they use when talking about something becoming a currency in a medium of exchange. Ta'amul, this customary practice, can be imposed or can come about in two ways. Either organically, where people start developing a habit and that habit spreads like wildfire and everybody adopts it. That becomes an urf. Or it can be imposed by the authorities. That makes something an urf overnight because of legislation. So urf can be top down or bottom up. And so if there's a CBDC, right, the central bank digital currency, the government develops one, the urf is established immediately. The government has authorized it and made it legal tender. And therefore, it will become medium of exchange. There'll be no debate, no argument. right? It'll become a medium of exchange immediately, which you could use.
Jazakumullah khairan. Last question, Mufti Saab. Any opinion on the coin called Muslim coins?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like to take any opinion on any specific coin here, but I'd just be, I've not seen what it is. But again, if anybody is using Muslim, Islam, or any, just look at the fundamentals again and look at what's being done. Just because there's Sharia compliant, Sharia technology, Sharia kind of say language and literature being used, it doesn't make it Sharia compliant. You have to be very careful, understand what the fundamentals are. Personally, I'm always skeptical of these things, but that's my personal view, and I would just be very careful before investing in any such kind of project, because there's a lot of scams out there, honestly, and it's very easy and it's very simple to use Islamic terminologies to for these kinds of projects. So be very careful, do a full analysis before committing to anything, and if you don't know, then learn first. I would say the parting advice I would love to give to everyone is, like, mashallah, everybody's come here and we're in this discussion together. It's for knowledge and learning. We have to learn a lot. We need to know economics, law, banking, regulation, finance, tax. All these things need to be learned to be able to master this space and to really be of value to people in this space and to make a change and make a difference.
Jazakumullah khairan to Mufti Faraz Adam, our special guest speaker all the way from UK. Mufti Saab serves at the Amana Advisors as well as on multiple Sharia boards, and he has delivered a very comprehensive and detailed presentation on digital assets, which includes what we commonly know as cryptocurrencies and crypto assets. It has been very, very informative and enriching, and lays out many of the fundamental principles in us understanding how digital assets work and what the underpinnings are in terms of the Sharia requirements in reviewing and analyzing these instruments. We really are appreciative of Mufti Saab taking out his time to present to us this morning, and we are also appreciative of the various guests that have joined us. Jazakumullah khairan to one and all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Mufti Saab and increase him in knowledge, and allow us to benefit further from his extensive knowledge. And we look forward, inshallah, to having Mufti Saab present to us on other relevant topics in the future. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.